Sir Patrick Valance, a man who, in my view, all but bankrupted this country with the disastrous and failed experiment of lockdown costing future generations a cool £500 billion, is at it again, this time tweeting about climate change. Here's what he had to say. To reach net zero, we must work together to accelerate innovation and make clean technologies the most affordable, accessible and attractive option, PV. No one can argue with the fact that low-cost clean energy is highly desirable, but be clear, this sort of statement has the same flavour as the so-called nudge messaging born out of behavioural science that we saw during the pandemic. In other words, brainwashing. During the pandemic, we were given the impression COVID was the bubonic plague, which it was not. And now the message is that the Earth will have burnt down by next Tuesday due to global warming. On the positive side, we'll have a nice warm weekend before it happens. The important part of his tweet is the expression net zero, which, as we've discovered in recent months, has proved to be the undoing of this country and the West. Arrogant German leaders laughed at Donald Trump in 2018 when the then president warned them that Germany was getting far too dependent on Russian oil and gas. Take a look.
Germany will become totally dependent on Russian energy if it does not immediately change course. Here in the Western Hemisphere, we are committed to maintaining our independence from the encroachment of expansionist foreign powers.
How right he was. Well, here we are. Germany have spent hundreds of billions of pounds on renewables over the last 10 years, and yet are facing energy Armageddon in the months ahead, with their lucrative manufacturing base made up of the likes of Mercedes-Benz and Siemens facing an energy supply crisis for their factories. Will the last person to leave Germany please switch the lights out? Achtung. And Angela Merkel, the most overrated European politician in decades, proudly announced in 2011, aided and abetted by Green MPs in her coalition, that Germany was not going to pursue nuclear. That aged well, didn't it? And disgracefully, David Cameron also failed to greenlight several new nuclear power stations in 2010. They would be up and running now, and we would be in a very different place. Well done, everyone. Now, I'm all for a cleaner planet, and let's get those carbon emissions down. When it comes to global warming, my mind is open. But after 2.5 years of, in my view, anti-scientific COVID policies and junk modelling in relation to the virus, forgive me for having questions and not slavishly following the science. Let's debate all of this in the way that we didn't debate COVID and make sure that any measures are done with the consent of you, the voters. Again, something that didn't happen during the pandemic and for which we're now paying the bill. Eye-wateringly expensive green policies, which are debatable at best given the intermittent and unreliable performance of renewables, seem to have been exclusive to the woke West, with our politicians in the UK and across Europe proudly making announcement after announcement about green targets and net zero. They've won plaudits from the political, corporate and media elite, whilst making their citizens poorer. And as the great unwashed, us plebs, shiver in our homes this winter. And we will be unwashed. Who the hell will be able to afford a shower, let alone a cup of tea this December? A tunnel vision virtue signalling approach to the environment has destroyed our energy supply and left us in this predicament. And whilst the West went for broke, quite literally, in pursuing net zero, China, the United States, India, Brazil and others didn't get the memo. They continued to burn fossil fuels like they were going out of fashion, building coal-fired power stations at a rate of knots and making a mockery of Western Europe, who are now borrowing more billions to subsidise businesses and households with their bills. It's the net zero of which Patrick Valance is so proud that has given Vladimir Putin such a power base. By failing to tap into the natural resources that we have in this country, 20 years of shale, 30 years of gas, 100 years of coal, and spending far too long saying no to nuclear, Putin has a stranglehold over the West. He hinted in a speech this week that he may go nuclear with Ukraine in that ongoing conflict. But be clear, he's already pressed the nuclear button by successfully weaponizing his control of energy resources upon which the West is so pathetically dependent. If we're honest, we've nuked ourselves. And can we just reflect on the incredibly arrogant nature of Patrick Valance's tweet? Sam, can you get it back up for me? Take a look at this. He signed it off at the end as PV, right? Patrick Valance, his initials, of course. PV, like he's some kind of celebrity. Well, as far as I'm concerned, PV can pee off. Not satisfied with wrecking the country economically, smashing the health service to pieces and creating a miserable, isolated society as a result of lockdowns and other COVID measures, he wants to finish the country off with yet another experiment, stopping climate change. Good luck with that. Having supported horrific mask mandates, especially for kids, which are as scientifically flaky as the masks themselves. Having supported school closures, which most people now admit was a terrible mistake. Having supported vaccine mandates for millions of Brits who statistically probably didn't even need a jab in the first place, he should be keeping a very low profile. It's my view that history will judge what Sage and the likes of Valance and Whitty have done to this country very harshly indeed. Jail sentence? You tell me. It would be funny to lock them down, though, wouldn't it? But be clear, the likes of Valance will transfer the apparatus of control assembled during COVID to the net zero agenda. And as with lockdowns, measures to, in inverted commas, save the planet will be just as unilateral, just as undemocratic, just as coercive, and will see just as little debate as COVID restrictions. You can just imagine the slogans now, can't you? Stay home to save the planet. Don't eat meat to save the planet. Get rid of your car to save the planet. Now, I want to look after the environment. Who doesn't want cleaner air, cleaner rivers and seas, and cheap, sustainable energy? And why do you think I hate those environmentally catastrophic masks so much? But let's debate how we move forward. I suspect it'll be a mix, including drilling for fossil fuels on our own shores in the short to medium term, until renewables and nuclear punch their weight. By all means, phase fossil fuels out over time when the economic case is there and supply can be achieved by other means. But in the meantime, let's not bankrupt ourselves in this race to go green, whilst China and others carry on regardless. What a carry on. Blindly pursuing net zero threatens to hasten the decline of the West and therefore poses an existential threat to the free world. Net zero? Net on my watch.